Hello, welcome to Secret Zone. Subscribe and turn on notifications for stories you won't forget. The last message my wife sent me that night was short and simple. Don't wait up. I'll be late again. I remember staring at my phone long after the screen went dark, not because I was angry or suspicious, but because something inside my chest felt unusually heavy. At that moment, I still believed my marriage was built on honesty. I still believed that love protected people from lies. I still believed that trust, once earned, didn't need to be questioned. I had no idea that this one ordinary message would quietly pull me toward the most painful truth of my life. That night, my wife didn't just come home late. That night, the life I thought I was living began to fall apart in ways I wasn't prepared for. My name is Daniel Carter, and for years, I believed I was one of the fortunate ones. I had a stable job that paid the bills, a peaceful home that felt safe, and a wife named Emily who had been my partner, my friend, and my comfort for nearly a decade. We had been married for 9 years, and those years were filled with routines that made life feel steady. Morning coffee together before work, quiet dinners after long days, weekend plans that didn't need excitement to feel meaningful. We weren't perfect, but we were solid, or at least that's what I believed. Emily worked as a project coordinator at a marketing firm downtown, a job she often described as demanding and unpredictable. Late meetings, tight deadlines, and last-minute changes were common in her line of work. And at first, I admired her dedication. When she told me she had to stay late, I never questioned it. I trusted her completely, because that's what marriage is supposed to be built on. Slowly, though, late nights stopped feeling occasional and started becoming routine. At first, she would call in the evening, explaining that work had piled up again. I'd tell her not to rush, and that dinner would be waiting. Over time, those calls turned into brief text messages, and then into nothing at all. Some nights, hours would pass without a word. I told myself she was busy. I told myself I was being selfish for wanting more attention. Trust has a strange way of silencing doubt when you don't want to hear it. I began eating dinner alone more often than I realized, sitting across from an empty chair, convincing myself that this was just a phase, and that marriage sometimes required patience. There were small changes I noticed, but chose to ignore. Emily stopped sharing stories about her workdays, brushing off my questions with tired smiles and vague answers. She began guarding her phone in ways she never had before, keeping it face down, changing her password, taking it with her everywhere. When she came home late, she would head straight for the shower, as if she needed to wash the day away. None of these things were enough to accuse her of anything, and that's exactly why I said nothing. Love has a way of making excuses feel reasonable. I told myself I was overthinking, that stress changes people, that real trust means giving someone space, even when it feels uncomfortable. The first time I caught her in a lie, it was so small that I almost felt embarrassed for noticing. She told me a phone had died at work, yet seconds after she walked through the door, it lit up on the table. She laughed it off, and I laughed with her, even though something inside me tightened. I didn't confront her. I didn't question her. I convinced myself that peace was more important than clarity. But doubt, once planted, doesn't disappear. It waits quietly, growing in the background. Then came the night that changed everything. Emily didn't call. She didn't text. My messages went unanswered as the hours passed, and the house felt unusually silent. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a single message. Emergency meeting. Don't worry. I'll explain tomorrow. Emergency meeting at that hour. I read those words over and over, feeling a strange mix of fear and disbelief. I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I was unsettled by a realization I had avoided for months. I had no real idea where my wife was. Sitting alone in the living room, surrounded by photos and memories that suddenly felt unfamiliar, I made a decision I never thought I would make. I picked up my car keys. Not to follow her, not to accuse her, but to quiet the voice in my head that refused to be ignored. I told myself I would just drive by her office, just to reassure myself, just to prove that my doubts were wrong. I didn't know then that this simple decision would shatter everything I believed about my marriage and force me to face a truth I was never ready to see. For a long time, my life followed a rhythm that felt safe. Walk up, barely make coffee, kiss my wife goodbye, go to work, come home, eat dinner together. It wasn't exciting, but it was steady, and I believe steady meant strong. My wife, Emily, used to laugh at my love for routine. She'd say, You like knowing what comes next? And she was right. I liked certainty. I liked believing that the person sleeping beside me every night was exactly who she claimed to be. Emily had always been ambitious. She worked at a marketing firm downtown and took pride in being reliable. When she first started staying late at work, I admired her dedication. She'd apologize softly, saying deadlines were tight and clients were demanding. I'd tell her not to worry. Marriage, I believed, was about support. If one of us had to carry more weight for a while, the other stepped up. But gradually, something shifted. Late nights became frequent and expected. Dinner plates started going cold. Conversations grew shorter. When Emily came home, she looked drained and not just tired, but distant. She'd smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I noticed it, but I didn't question it. I told myself stress does that to people. One night, while we sat on opposite ends of the couch, I asked her about a project she used to talk about constantly. She shrugged and said, "It's complicated." Then she changed the subject. It was the first time I felt like there was a wall between us. Not a loud one. A quiet one. The kind you only noticed when you lean in and realize you can't hear the other person anymore. Still, I defended her to myself and to others. When friends joked about long hours or raised eyebrows, I shut it down immediately. She's just busy, I'd say. And I meant it. Trust wasn't something I questioned as Ellie. I believed doubting your spouse without proof was a betrayal of its own. But small things began to bother me. Emily started guarding her phone. She used to leave it anywhere on the counter, the couch, the bed. Now, it never left her side. Notifications were silent. Screens face down. Once, I accidentally picked it up to move it, and she reacted so quickly it startled me. "I need that," she said, a little too sharply. She apologized right after, but the moment lingered in my mind longer than it should have. I told myself I was imagining things. That love requires patience, that 9 years of marriage deserved more faith than doubt. I clung to that belief, unaware that I was slowly training myself to ignore the truth. The more Emily stayed late, the quieter our home became. We used to talk about everything: work, stress, dreams, random thoughts that didn't matter but felt important because they were shared. Now, silence filled the spaces between us. When she came home after midnight, I'd pretend to be asleep, partly because I was tired, and partly because I didn't want to ask questions I was afraid to hear answers to. One evening, she came home earlier than usual. I remember feeling relieved, even happy, but when I asked why she was back so soon, she hesitated before answering. "The meeting got cancelled," she said. Her voice was calm, but something about the pause unsettled me. Later that night, I saw an email notification pop up on her phone while she was in the shower. It mentioned the same meeting scheduled for the next day. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. The damage was already done. That was the moment I realized trust doesn't disappear suddenly. It erodes quietly, grain by grain, until one day you look down and realize there's nothing solid left beneath your feet. I started paying attention, not spying, just noticing. Patterns, inconsistencies. Emily's stories didn't always match. Her explanations felt rehearsed, like answers prepared in advance. Still, I said nothing. I smiled. I played my role, because confronting her meant accepting the possibility that I was wrong about everything. Then came the night she didn't answer at all. No call, no text. Hours passed, and my concern turned into something heavier. When her message finally arrived, emergency meeting. Don't worry. I felt a strange calm settle over me, almost. Clarity. For the first time, I stopped trying to convince myself everything was fine. I grabbed my keys without thinking too much about it. I told myself I just needed reassurance. I drove toward her office, repeating the same lie in my head. "This will prove you're overreacting." The parking lot was empty. The building was dark. I sat there for a long moment, engine running, heart pounding. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. That was when I understood something terrifying. Whatever was happening in my marriage, it wasn't happening at her workplace. I didn't know where to go next. I sat in my car, staring at the empty building, feeling foolish and exposed. Part of me wanted to turn around and go home, to pretend I'd never come. But another part part that had been ignored for too long refused to stay silent. I remembered a name Emily had mentioned once, casually, months ago. A client. A project partner. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, it felt like a thread I had to follow. I drove across town, my chest tightening with every mile. When I finally arrived, I saw her car parked under a streetlight. My heart dropped. I parked a few spaces away and just sat there, frozen. I didn't want to look up. I didn't want confirmation, but I forced myself to step out of the car. Through the window, I saw them. Not in the way I expected. No intimacy, no laughter. Just Emily sitting across from someone, her face serious, her body language tense. They looked familiar. Too familiar. In that moment, I realized the truth wasn't simple. It wasn't just about being late. It was about a life she had been living separately from me. When Emily finally noticed me standing there, her face went pale. She came outside immediately. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, it was affright. "I could ask you the same thing," I said quietly. She didn't deny it. She didn't argue. She just looked at me, tears forming, and said, "I didn't know how to tell you." We sat in the car for a long time without speaking. When she finally explained, her words felt heavy and fragile, like glass. She hadn't been cheating, not physically, but she had been hiding something just as destructive. A past she never told me about. A connection she thought she had left behind, but hadn't. Someone who knew parts of her I never did. She said she was afraid of losing me. Afraid that if I knew everything, I wouldn't look at her the same way. And maybe she was right. Because as I listened, I realized trust isn't just about loyalty, it's about honesty. And honesty had been missing for a long time. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just felt tired. Tired of guessing. Tired of believing half-truths. Tired of loving someone I no longer fully knew. That night didn't end our marriage immediately, but it changed it forever. Because once trust cracks, it never sounds the same again. I learned something painful that night. Love doesn't survive on good intentions alone. It survives on truth, especially the uncomfortable kind. And sometimes, what you find when someone says they're reworking late IST betrayal in the way you imagined, but a deeper realization that the person you trusted most was never completely honest with you at all. That night ended in silence. Not the kind of quiet you expect after a long day, but the kind that presses against your chest and makes the world feel heavier than it should. Emily and I didn't argue. We didn't shout. We just sat, side by side, letting the truth sink into the spaces between us. Letting the weight of unspoken years settle in our hearts. I stared out the window at the empty streetlights, at the shadows stretching along the walls, at the world that seemed so normal while my own life had shifted into something unrecognizable. And I realized something I had never fully understood before. Trust isn't just given. It isn't something that exists because love is strong. Trust is built day by day, word by word, honesty by honesty, and once it cracks, even the smallest fissure can turn into a canyon you can't cross. Emily finally turned toward me, her eyes glistening, full of a mix of shame, fear, and vulnerability. She tried to explain everything, every detail she had kept hidden, every reason she thought she was protecting me by remaining silent. And as she spoke, I listened not just with my ears, but with every part of me, trying to understand, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the truth I had just discovered. I won't lie, it hurt. Every revelation, every admission, struck me like a wave, leaving me breathless, leaving me questioning not just her choices, but my own ability to truly know someone. Marriage, I realized, isn't just about love or companionship. It's about seeing someone completely, accepting their flaws and secrets, and still choosing to walk beside them. And that night, I understood that seeing someone completely sometimes comes too late. When the words finally ran out, the silence returned, but it felt different now. It was heavy, yes, but it was also clarifying. I had seen the truth, ugly and raw, and I had survived it. I knew that nothing could undo what had been revealed, but I also knew that I could choose how to move forward. I could choose to let bitterness and anger control me, or I could choose to learn from the cracks, to rebuild, not in the same way, but in a way that honored reality instead of pretending it didn't exist. Love isn't blind, I realized. Love must see and survive the imperfections. The secrets, the moments we wish didn't exist. The days that followed were quiet, but filled with reflection. Emily and I spoke less about work, less about routines, and more about honesty. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old habits, old lies, crept back into our conversations, when my chest tightened at the faintest hint of evasion. But we faced it together, at least in small ways. I learned to listen not just to her words, but to the silences in between. And more importantly, I learned to trust. Carefully, not blindly. Because trust given without understanding can be just as dangerous as mistrust. That night taught me something profound. Sometimes the person you love most, I sentí hiding betrayal in the way you imagine. But they are hiding themselves, their fears, their regrets, the parts of their past they think might shatter everything you built together. And when the truth finally comes to light, it changes everything, not necessarily in a way that ends love, but in a way that forever changes how you see it, how you hold it, and how you carry it forward. I don't know what the future holds for Emily and me. I don't know if the trust we slowly rebuilding will ever feel the same as it once did. But I do know this. Life has a way of teaching you lessons you never asked for, in ways that hurt more than you imagined. And sometimes, the hardest truths lead to the clearest understanding that love, trust, and honesty aren't guarantees. They are choices we make every day, in every conversation, in every small act, and in every moment we decide to see someone as they truly are, even when that truth shakes us to our core. And that night, when I finally sat alone after our conversation, I understood something that I will never forget. The most painful discoveries often carry the deepest lessons, and the most broken moments can shape the strongest awareness. I learned that love is never simple. Trust is never absolute. And the person you thought you knew might still hold secrets, but seeing the truth is always better than living a lie. And with that knowledge, I chose to face the future aware, cautious, but determined to carry on.